We often speak of the burning of the Library of Alexandria as the greatest tragedy of the ancient world, a moment when centuries of human knowledge were turned to ash. Yet, a similar, perhaps more systematic destruction occurred right here in North America, not by the hands of invading barbarians, but under the orders of government bureaus and industrial developers. The disappearance of the giants of the Old West was not a passive event. The bones did not simply decay into dust. They were actively pulverized, hidden, and in some cases incinerated to clear the path for a new historical narrative. From the late 19th century onwards, a shadow policy seemed to take effect across the frontier. When steam shovels hit the massive burial mounds of the Midwest, or when miners broke into the crypts of the West, the orders were rarely to preserve. They were to clear. The physical evidence of a giant pre-Columbian civilization was treated as debris, an obstacle to the construction of railroads and the writing of textbooks. This is the story of the Great American Incineration, the secret order to ensure that the only giants remaining in the history books were tall tales, while the real bones were burned to hide the truth of who really built this continent. The Powell Doctrine, the official order of erasure. The systematic erasure of the American giants can be traced back to a specific bureaucratic turning point in 1879, the founding of the Smithsonian Institution's Bureau of Ethnology. At the helm was Major John Wesley Powell, a celebrated explorer of the Colorado River and a man deeply committed to the concept of social evolution. Powell found himself fighting a war on two fronts. He was battling the chaotic landscape of the West, but he was also battling the rampant theories about lost races. At the time, newspapers were filled with reports of giant skeletons and advanced artifacts that suggested a powerful non-indigenous civilization had once ruled the Mississippi Valley. This doctrine was not merely an academic suggestion, it was an administrative stranglehold on truth. Powell and his successor, Cyrus Thomas, launched a massive campaign to debunk the myth of the mound builders. They sent agents across the country not necessarily to find the truth, but to confirm the Bureau's predetermined conclusion. Any field researcher or museum curator who wanted funding or recognition had to align with the Powell Doctrine. This created a powerful filter for evidence. If a digging team unearthed a skeleton that was 7 feet tall with double rows of teeth, they faced a choice: report it accurately and be ridiculed by the Washington establishment as a hoaxer, or simply discard the anomalous bones and report the standard artifacts found alongside them. The long-term consequence of Powell's directive was the institutionalization of memory loss. By declaring that there was nothing to see here regarding a distinct ancient race, the government gave a tacit green light to the destruction of the sites themselves. Since the mounds were officially classified as simple indigenous burial grounds rather than the ruins of a complex, unique civilization, they were not afforded the same protection as the ruins of Rome or Egypt. They were viewed as impediments to agriculture and expansion. The demolition of Mound City, St. Louis, before St. Louis, Missouri, became the gateway to the West. It was known by a different name, Mound City. The area was once the site of a sprawling ancient metropolis, rivaling the complexity of Mayan sites, with dozens of massive earthworks lining the Mississippi River. The crown jewel of this complex was the Big Mound, a colossal terraced pyramid that stood over 30 feet tall and stretched hundreds of feet in length. It was a monument that should have been preserved as a World Heritage Site, a testament to the engineering prowess of the ancient Americans. However, in the late 1860s, the expanding city viewed the Big Mound not as a treasure, but as a nuisance, a pile of dirt standing in the way of the North Missouri Railroad. In 1869, the order was given to dismantle the mound, and steam shovels began to tear into the structure, systematically erasing the history of the region to make way for bricks and tracks. As the workers cut into the heart of the big mound, they uncovered something that shocked the gathered crowds. Near the base of the mound, they found a massive burial chamber containing two skeletons of extraordinary size. According to reports from the time, these were not average humans. The jawbones alone were large enough to fit over the face of a modern man, and the femurs indicated a height that dwarfed the laborers digging them out. This was the royal family of Mound City, the giant architects of a lost civilization finally exposed to the sunlight after millennia. In a sane world, the digging would have stopped and the site would have been secured, but the order to clear the land was absolute. There was no pause for archaeology. The bones were treated as curiosities for a few hours, gawked at by the public, and then, as the steam shovels continued their relentless march, the remains were largely crushed, scattered, or carted off as fill dirt for the new railroad embankment. The Grand Canyon Citadel Cover-Up, 1909. In April 1909, the Arizona Gazette published a front-page story that should have been the archaeological scoop of the century. Headlined, "Explorations in Grand Canyon." The article detailed the journey of G.E. Kincaid, an explorer sponsored by the Smithsonian who claimed to have discovered a massive underground citadel carved into the canyon walls. Kincaid described a tunnel entrance located nearly 1,500 feet down the sheer cliff face, inaccessible to all but the most determined climbers. Inside, he reported finding a vast network of chambers radiating from a central passage filled with artifacts that looked distinctly Egyptian or Oriental, including copper tools, urns, and a grey metal that resembled platinum. Most distinctively, he described a crypt filled with mummies wrapped in dark bark fabric, all of whom were male and of a stature that suggested a warrior class, guarding a history that predated the known tribes of the region. The detailed description of the citadel painted a picture of a civilization that had no business being in Arizona according to standard history. Kincaid spoke of a shrine containing a statue that resembled Buddha, holding lotus flowers and hieroglyphics carved into the rock that he could not decipher. The implication was clear. A trans-Pacific or transatlantic culture of giants had established a fortress in the Grand Canyon thousands of years ago. Kincaid claimed that the Smithsonian was actively involved, with a Professor S.A. Jordan preparing to ship the artifacts back to Washington. It had all the makings of a discovery that would rewrite human history. And then, silence. The story vanished. The Smithsonian immediately and vehemently denied any knowledge of Kincaid, Professor Jordan, or the expedition, calling the entire account a fabrication. The story was killed before it could spread, treated by the establishment as a newspaper hoax. However, the hoax explanation fails to account for the physical aftermath in the canyon itself. In the years following the report, the specific area where Kincaid claimed to have found the cave, near the sheer cliffs of the Marble Canyon region, became a restricted zone. Indeed, to this day, large sections of the Grand Canyon are off-limits to hikers and unauthorized personnel, with vague citations of public safety or preservation. Conspiracy theorists and rogue hikers have long alleged that the entrance to Kincaid's cave was not just ignored, but actively sealed, blasted shut with dynamite by federal agents to ensure that the contents would never be seen again. The Grand Canyon cover-up represents the ultimate form of evidence destruction. If you cannot move the artifacts, you bury the door. By sealing the citadel, the government effectively turned the mountain itself into a vault, ensuring that the secrets of the canyon giants would remain buried in the dark forever. The Smithsonian's Atlantic dumping allegations. While the destruction of mounds and the sealing of caves effectively removed the context of the giants, the problem of the physical bones remained. By the early 20th century, the Smithsonian Institution and other major museums were reportedly overflowing with skeletal remains sent in by agents from across the country. According to the Powell Doctrine, these bones officially held no scientific value if they defied the standard evolutionary timeline, yet they took up valuable storage space. It is here that one of the most persistent and disturbing allegations in American archaeology emerges: the theory of the Atlantic dumping. Whistleblowers and researchers have long circulated accounts suggesting that when the vaults became too full of problematic specimens, the solution was not to catalogue them, but to sink them. The allegation is that barges loaded with crates of unclassified or ethnological waste, a euphemism for the giant bones and anomalies, were quietly towed out of the Potomac River and into the Atlantic Ocean, where the evidence was dumped overboard. This method of disposal represents the ultimate cleanup operation. Incineration requires fuel and creates smoke and ash that can be analyzed, but the ocean is a perfect void. If these allegations are true, it means that the Smithsonian didn't just hide the history of the continent, they drowned it. The logistics of such an operation in the early 1900s would have been relatively simple to conceal among the daily commercial traffic of the river. The crates, likely unmarked or mislabeled as rocks or broken pottery, would vanish beneath the waves, taking with them the undeniable proof of a giant race. This theory aligns with the sudden drop-off in giant reports in museum annual catalogues after 1910. One year, they are receiving hundreds of skeletons. A few years later, the records are silent, and the storage rooms are mysteriously available for new, approved artifacts. The administrative gap suggests a mass purge of the inventory. The Atlantic dumping theory also explains why modern demands to open the vaults often yield nothing. Skeptics argue that if the Smithsonian were hiding giants, someone would have leaked a photo or stolen a bone by now. But if the secret order was to physically liquidate the inventory over a century ago, then there are no bones left to find. The crime scene was scrubbed clean before the invention of the internet or DNA sequencing. The giants were not merely forgotten. They were actively evicted from the solid ground of the continent they once ruled. By committing the remains to the deep, the archaeological establishment ensured that no future forensic technology could ever resurrect the truth. The evidence isn't locked in a cabinet, it is eroding at the bottom of the sea, lost to the pressure and the salt, ensuring the silence of the giants is permanent. The modern incinerator, NAGPRA, and the reburial mandate. In the modern era, the government no longer needs barges or dynamite to destroy evidence. They have lawyers. The incinerator of the 21st century is a piece of legislation known as NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act of 1990. While the law was written with the noble intention of returning stolen ancestors to indigenous tribes, it has been weaponized to act as a firewall against scientific inquiry. The law mandates that any human remains found on federal land that predate the arrival of Europeans must be returned to local tribes for reburial. Crucially, this often happens without DNA analysis or detailed osteological study. This creates a perfect legal catch-22 for the giant theory. The bones are declared Native American by default, and because they are Native American, they cannot be studied to prove they are actually something else. The case of the Kennewick Man serves as the prime example of this catch-and-kill policy in action. When a 9,000-year-old skeleton with Caucasian features was found in Washington state, the Army Corps of Engineers moved with shocking speed to bury the site. They didn't just try to hand over the bones, they literally dumped tons of rock and soil over the discovery location to prevent further excavation, an act of geological vandalism that stunned scientists. Although the Kennewick Man was eventually studied after a decade-long court battle, the government's initial instinct was to destroy the context immediately. If a skeleton of a 9-foot giant were found today, NAGPRA would ensure it was reburied before a single photograph could be published. The law effectively grants the government a mandate to hide anomalies under the guise of cultural sensitivity. This legal framework ensures that the secret order to burn the evidence is now self-executing. We have the technology to unlock the secrets of the past. We can sequence ancient DNA, analyze isotopes, and reconstruct faces, but we have legally forbidden ourselves from using it on the most controversial finds. The reburial mandate acts as a memory hole. Every time a giant skeleton is found by a construction crew today, it is quietly turned over and put back into the ground, often in secret locations, ensuring that the data is lost forever. The modern government doesn't need to conspire in shadowy backrooms. They simply follow the statute. By legislating the reburial of the past, they have ensured that the giants remain a myth, safely decomposing in the dirt, protected by the very laws meant to honor history. The investigation into the disappearance of the American giants leads to a sobering conclusion. The perfect crime is the one where the body is never found because the body was systematically destroyed. The secret order was not a single memo signed by a shadowy figure, but a century-long reflex of the establishment to crush anything that threatened the approved narrative. Through the demolition of the mounds in St. Louis, the sealing of the caves in the Grand Canyon, the alleged dumping of crates in the Atlantic, and the legal strangulation of Nag Pra, the physical proof has been reduced to ashes and dust. We are left with a history book that has had pages torn out. The skeptics demand bones, but the very institutions that were entrusted to keep them were the ones who threw them away. The Great American Incineration was successful. The giants have been erased from the physical world, leaving us only with the tall tales and the haunting suspicion that beneath our feet lies a history that was burned to keep us in the dark.